Yes, it did.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Thanks for inviting us into your living rooms or wherever you are. Great show tonight, including a visit by Dan Hoft, who leads St. Louis University's Vaccine Center. He'll be with us on Donnybrook Next Up. But first, let's meet those assembled around the big table, or at least wherever they are, on this edition of Donnybrook. Christine Byers is sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who's taking the week off. Christine, of course, works with News Channel 5. Mr. Bill McClellan with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He's Ray Hartmann from the Riverfront Times, rawstory.com, and the Big 550 KTRS. Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American, as well as 590 AM and 97.1 FM. And we should point out that Wendy Weiss is now a grandmother.
You're
As
here.
we welcome a new viewer to the 9 Network. He's Henry Thomas Admire, 8 pounds, 11 ounces, 21 inches tall, born on the 15th of this month. And of course, the beautiful son of Maggie and Jacob Admire. And so we wish Grandma and the entire clan the very best. And we'll see Wendy, I believe, next week. Well, we had some big announcements, Christine Byers, as the mayor of the city of St. Louis 2 days ago, maybe yesterday, actually announced that she's not going to seek re-election in 2021. Lyda Krewson is going to serve 1 term, and she said she recently celebrated her birthday. She said life is too short. She wants to spend it doing some other things, and so she's moving on. Were you surprised by this?
I mean, I was and I wasn't, but, you know, certainly on her first day, she came in, made a huge, bold move for a mayor, got rid of the police chief, and ever since then has really struggled to get a hold of the crime problem. I mean, obviously this year, the city's on pace to surpass all of its previous records, having the deadliest year on record, and she's really faced an uphill battle with that. She did appoint Jimmy Edwards as public safety director, and she appointed John Hayden as police chief. But neither of them have been able to really get their hands around this crime problem. And, you know, but she at the same time has been celebrated for her COVID response as well. So.
Yeah, I thought she did a good job with the COVID response this year. I mean, I thought she set the right tone. And it turns out that the cases and deaths have actually leveled off quite a bit, especially when you compare St. Louis City to other counties across the state. So, team, I give her credit for that, although I have to admit, yeah, crime is now under the control of the mayor of St. Louis, and we've got 232 homicides this year. We're going to set a record, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, let's be especially gracious here, though, Charlie. I mean, Lyda Krewson got some things accomplished. The NGA stayed in St. Louis. That Cortex is moving along. I mean, the seeds are there for the city to recover and grow, and I think that Lyda will be seen as a transitional mayor, and she's a baby boomer who's leaving graciously, and that's a rarity.
I think that's great, and I agree with everything you said. Plus, I think there's some irony in the fact that COVID is one of the things that makes it difficult for an incumbent and makes everything kind of negative. And she's definitely, I think, been the best in the region in dealing with COVID, and it has been her strongest issue. I think she lost the room on Better Together and airport privatization first, and that was so unpopular, and she wasn't independent enough of Rex Singfield and his thinking. And I think that's where she really got to. And Christine's absolutely right. That's been eclipsed now with the crime problem, and the sort of the crescendo was when she doxed those people that were, you know, doing little defund the police, you know, messages to her, and she doxed them and published their names in June. And I think that was sort of the tip. That's sort of what the straw that broke the camel's back, whatever. But I think on balance, you're right. I think it's a mixed record, and she's definitely got a great personal story.
Okay, on the COVID, I think she did what anybody would have been the mayor if they were elected. Now, she barely won the primary, which means, that was where the race was, 4 years ago in I guess that's late winter, I guess that's not spring, of 2017. And, when she was elected, it was the same gang that had Mayor Slate in there for 4 terms for 16 years. And you could throw Cortex. I think Cortex was coming because that's, a business entity. The Spy Intelligence Center, it was either going to stay in St. Louis or it was moving elsewhere. And I think she had little to do with that, as Bob Clark shared with us when he was on as a guest. And she lost me when she left her house because they were protesting outside. And if you let people chase you up out of your house, I just don't think you had the fortitude to be the mayor of the city. And I'm not convinced that she ever really wanted to be mayor of the city of St. Louis. I think she got convinced to run in that race. And I think that's the byproduct is that she only wants to do it for 4 years.
I got to respectfully disagree on that one. I think that the protesters created a terrible condition for her. They should not be protesting at people's homes.
I didn't say they should, Charlie.
Right,
and I say it's a tough situation.
She had to move
Charlie,
out.
Would you move?
Excuse me, I was speaking.
Charlie,
this woman was badgered by these protesters, couldn't sleep. They were breaking her windows, spray painting the place. I think it might be one of the reasons why she's resigning.
Maybe it is, but I would not let anybody chase me out of my house. I would not do it. Man, woman, anybody. I'm the mayor. Now, whatever I need to do to end this, then I would have done that, okay? That's just, you can't, peaceful, non-peaceful, whatever. I thought it showed weakness. I did. I really did.
I would have been afraid for my life.
Well, Charlie, let me put it this way. A lot of people are afraid for their lives all the time. They to serve as a police officer or something like that. But if I'm the CEO of a city and I'm in charge of it, nobody is going to chase me out of my house for any reason. If I had to build a moat and put alligators in it, if I had to have guards in my front yard 24 hours a day, I would do it. I'm not leaving my house.
Yeah, but the house is not that well protected from the sidewalk. It's not like
it would have been if I lived there. I'm the mayor.
That wasn't unprecedented. Don't you remember when
I would have told the chief of police to guard my house? I'm the mayor. If you don't want to do it, I'll fire you. I would have told him.
Don't you remember, and I think that Ray and Bill remember this, at one point, Vince Shamel had to move out of his house. He went into a safe house when Jerry Lewis Bay and his gang were allegedly going after him. So it's not like it's the first time this has happened.
So protesters are now gang members and mobsters.
When they're breaking your windows, yeah.
Okay, bye.
I think a lot of that, Alvin, was really on behalf of her neighbors. That when these protesters decided they were going to march in front of Lyda Cruzen's house at night, I think that for her neighbors, she said, okay, we'll get out. That's what I thought.
I don't think that was why she resigned. I mean, it might have been. I don't agree that she didn't want to be mayor. I think she, there's some speculation that the new system was going to make it more difficult for her, which it probably would have. Although I think she might have, but she could have competed in the new electoral system of the approval voting primary and so.
Well, not to be. I don't want to play Charlie's role, but does anybody here think that St. Louis is better now than it was 4 years ago?
Well, probably not because of a number of things.
So I'm not. I can't give her a way to go because I don't think she did that good a job.
But I understand that. But because
maybe if we look back on this from sometime in the future, Alvin, this will have turned out to be a pivotal time. Maybe saving the NGA, and maybe that wasn't her, but the Cortex growing, Square coming into town. I mean, in some of the neighborhoods being revitalized, more young people.
It wasn't. I think it's mixed. I mean, Union Station, there were some things that happened, and again, whether she did them herself or not. But I also think that she will be remembered. The other thing we haven't mentioned, which I think was really a bad thing, along the lines of Better Together and airport privatization, was setting the horrible precedent of encouraging the governor to come in and thwart the will of the aldermen and the people on the question of residency. I thought that was a terrible precedent that was set. And I had a problem with that one, even though I agreed with her on the substance of it. But, you know,
and we'll see how that works out. That's an interesting point.
All of the development that's going on in the city, too, and the major corporations, when they're thinking about projects in the city, all of them come back to crime issues. And I kind of thought the mayor was crazy, frankly, back in 2013 when they were fighting for local control of the police department and getting it back from the state, because I thought, why would you want a crime problem on your neck? It lands now solely in the lap of the mayor. And so I think that's just still the biggest issue that is going to plague her legacy is in the last 4 years, she's leaving on a year of record-setting homicides. Yep. And I also think she's going to have actually a pretty good amount of influence on who is going to be the next. She still has a campaign war chest, and she may throw that behind whatever candidate she supports.
I don't think she can do that.
Well, I will say this. I don't know how a mayor of the city of St. Louis can really thwart the homicide problem with the gun laws that currently exist in the state of Missouri.
Yeah, that's enough. But again, she did the opposite precedent by letting the governor, who is on record as not wanting St. Louis to control its own affairs. I mean, he has made it clear that he is not going to respect St. Louis's autonomy, whether it's with Kim Gardner or anybody else. And we went the wrong direction on this residency.
Really?
Thing. Yeah. And
okay.
But I don't want to be rated.
Okay.
Look, I mean, it's time for her to go. And I think she handled it well. And
okay. Well, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the weeks to come. But Alvin, speaking of protesters, and you and I were, there were protesters outside the county government building today, but they were kind of an unlikely crowd. They were restaurant workers who were upset with the shutdown of indoor dining in St. Louis County as of 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday. And it's really unusual because in the city of St. Louis, you can have indoor dining. Bob O'Loughlin runs the Cheshire Inn. He's got one restaurant, Basso, which is in the city. That's open. And he's got Fox and Hounds in the county on the same property, and it's closed. And it just kind of shows you that it's crazy in many ways, but also these restaurants are openly defiant of the health regulations. Bartolino's South, for example, is open. They are not closing. And among the guests the other night was Dave Marshak, who's the sheriff for Jefferson County. What do you make of this?
Well, I'll get back to that with the sheriff and all that, and they're being open. But I'll say, I'll defend the action that was taken because throughout this state, we are looking at how our governor is not doing anything. Okay, zero. And we said, he's got to do something. Mask mandate, he's got to do something. He's doing nothing, okay? But then on the other hand, the county executive does something, and a lot of people are upset with him. I think somebody has to do something. And trust me, I know several of the owners here in Kirkwood of restaurants, okay? And it impacts me because 5 minutes after we finish, the second show, I might be out the door to go to one of those establishments, but it's closed right now. All right, so quick analogy. We got a coyote problem. Okay, and it seems to me that a lot of these coyotes are coming from the counties around us, but we got a coyote problem in St. Louis County. Now, some people think the coyotes are cute. Some people think the coyotes don't exist, and the coyotes bite people, randomly, and not a lot of people, die from the coyote bites. But we got to do something about these darn coyotes. So the coyotes seem to go to these places and then follow the other coyotes to your house, and it's just, you got to do something. So he's doing something, and I can't be mad at him about that. Real quick, let me finish up. Real quick, as for the sheriff of Jefferson County and Bartolino's, the next time somebody is protesting peacefully, be it in the street, be it on the sidewalk, don't say nothing. Jefferson County should be the next Black Lives Matter protest because it's civil disobedience, and that's what they're doing. So, okay, I'm being civil disobedient because I own a restaurant. If somebody else is doing it, then leave them alone.
Well, the problem with that, I think, Alvin, is if you're going to really affect people's livelihoods like this is, I mean, the people who work in restaurants, restaurant owners, you should at least believe this is going to be effective. And it's not effective if it's only in St. Louis County. If people who want to, go out to eat can go to, the city and eat, can go to St. Charles and eat, then all you're doing is sort of a mirage effort. And I don't think you should shut people down for something that's not going to work.
But we don't know that. A month from now, if the level of infection goes down somewhat dramatically, then we could point and say that, hey, that actually had an impact. That actually worked. We don't know.
I'm sort of in the middle on this one because I definitely believe in following the science, and I will never second guess the sincerity and the efforts. We had Dr. Garza on here. They are so under siege, the public health officials. I really mean that. I'm not just trying to.
Yeah, no, nobody's arguing that, Ray.
I'm not. But I'm just saying, respecting that it's a tough decision, you've also got to look at the livelihoods of the restaurants and the fact that it'd be one thing if the entire county was shut down, if you couldn't go to Target, if you couldn't go to Costco, but it seems a little uneven. And that's the problem. And particularly when you have a situation as you have the city and St. Charles saying you can dine inside and you can't in the county. And they don't really have markedly different problems. I respect the difficult spot they're in, is all I'm saying, but I don't really know that I agree with the basic judgment. I think the idea of 25%, I mean, having some restrictions is certainly understandable, but everything's a judgment call. Once you decide to follow the science, what you can't do is what the governor of California did, which is follow the science, say all the right things and then not do the right things in his own world. And I also don't know about coyotes in restaurants.
I don't either. But I would say, I think that Sam Page should sit down with these restaurant owners, at least virtually, and kind of come to some middle ground accommodation, because I really fear that they're going to lose their livelihoods. They're going to lose their savings. Not to mention the employees who aren't working.
I do agree with you that when he started the dire warnings 2 weeks ago, and you kind of had a sense that something was coming, okay? Because he began saying this 2 weeks ago. I think at that time he should have went to the Restaurant Association and say, like, this is what I'm planning to do if it doesn't get better. And I think if the story breaks like that, instead of you just getting sued right off the top, I think people, look, we all might disagree, but I think it would have been a little bit more understanding. So I do agree with you on that.
One of the points in the lawsuit was made by the Restaurant Association was that Dr. Garza, in an interview a couple of weeks ago with NPR, was saying, even if we shut down the restaurants, I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference. And so that's something, too, that the restaurants are complaining about, when you can eat, just a few blocks away in the city, and you don't see the same arguments going on there.
Well, we do know, Ray Hartmann, that some legislators, as well as their staff, went to a retreat, and the next thing you know, a number of lawmakers in the state of Missouri and staff members came down with COVID-19. So as a result, they have delayed or postponed the special legislative session that was scheduled. There's that. One of the issues was to give the nursing homes and senior care facilities some measure of protection against litigation. Where do you stand on this?
Well, my fellow founder and I have been arguing about this for 3.5 decades, but I don't even think it matters where you stand on it. I mean, yes, I think the jury system is just fine. We have one of the most tort-reformed states now in the country as a result of legislation in recent years. So, yeah, I think there's plenty of protection for businesses who function in good faith. They don't need extra indemnification. But a larger point, and it's not a small one, is the concept of a special session, regardless of your point of view, is to address things that can't wait. In this case, the earliest the House of Representatives will convene as a whole is December 8th. On January 6th, the newly elected House of Representatives will be seated. It's like 4 weeks, okay? So you're going to tell me that litigating and discussing this issue of liability, which is a complicated issue, can't wait 4 weeks? And by the way, you're exposing, just in case everybody understands, this isn't going to go away like magic by December 8th. This is a very real pandemic. And Mike Parson, who is one of the most irresponsible governors in the country on this, and we're getting a real dwindling number that's got his head in the sand on mask mandates, it's just the fact they cannot deny away this virus, and that's got to be the number one concern.
Can I interrupt for just a second? I think that I'm accepting my fellow founders' surrender on the issue of liability.
I am not.
You'll notice how he immediately got off and about, and I don't.
Juries believe in the little guy. The
I'm
juries
not supporting Governor Parson, but the fact is with these funeral homes, if they don't have a certain get protection, they will all go bankrupt. And you might say, well, maybe they should, but they're the low rent funeral.
nursing home.
Senior citizens, the low rent senior citizens homes are there for a reason. They're people, there's no other place to go. They can't go to a high end place. And if you shut all the low end places down, which is what the lawsuits will do,
What
you just create a
lawsuits?
mess.
What lawsuits? I mean, there haven't been lawsuits. That's the thing.
Well, that's why they want some protection.
They don't need protection.
So many people died in those nursing homes, the low rent nursing homes. And if you just say, okay, trial lawyers, go at them.
But they're not. That's
those places out of existence. And I don't want to be in one, but I think they're necessary.
But they're not. You're talking about a hypothetical that doesn't exist. I was very seeing on
it. I mean, is the legislation just going to say for like nursing homes? Because if you pass a law, I think I've used this example before, where like said, like if management at your company, all this happened to all, come down with COVID, and they didn't tell anybody. Okay, they just didn't tell anybody who worked there, and they're in your face every day, and they're making people come to work that have COVID, or else they're fired. What is my recourse? I mean, I have the right to sue them? I just don't think you can take that right away.
Yes, Bill. And by the way, they have protections. The proving that someone got COVID from a nursing home is not easy. And even if they got it,
Ray, if there's an outbreak in a nursing home, and there were many of them, especially in the low rent places, I mean that'll be proof on its own face.
There would be no problem.
You have to prove it before a judge and a jury, Bill. You're acting like
Ray, if the nursing home resident doesn't move outside the nursing home, but contracts COVID-19, there's the proof right there.
Yeah.
I already argued this point before, but these are medical facilities, and they're supposed to be prepared for these kinds of things and preventing them. So I think these families are looking for some recourse and saying their plan wasn't effective enough here.
Well, Christine, as a reporter, you've probably been in some low-rent nursing homes. I know I have. And if people who are dropping off their parents there mistakenly think these things are medical facilities, I mean, some of these places you walk in and you go, oh, you don't even like being there.
Bill,
but they're there for a reason.
When someone sues, if there is apparent negligence that may be related to COVID and may not in a nursing home, when someone sues you, you don't go out of business. You go to court. You have your lawyers. You have the insurance company's lawyers. You have a jury. You have a judge. The idea that this is some kind of a deal where, oh my God, if we let lawsuits happen, and by the way, it's not just limited to them.
We have COVID-related lawsuits.
We have a system that
a whole bunch of low-end places go out of business.
Okay, good enough. I think we'll be discussing this for years to come, it tells me. Maybe another 35 years, guys. How about you, Christine Byers? Treasurer Tashara Jones went in front of the Board of Aldermen looking for some money. She's facing some layoffs because she runs parking lots next to Enterprise Center and throughout downtown, and she collects money from the parking meters. But of course, with the economy as it is and concerts and hockey games canceled, the money isn't coming in. So she's about to lay off 16 full-time and 9 part-time workers. So she wants money from the Board of Aldermen, and the Board of Aldermen is saying, not so fast. Do they have a point? After all, she's the one who stopped collecting cash from the parking meters, I believe, in March and April.
Yes, and she's also the one that approved a $7 million contract with Hudson and Associates, which is owned and operated by one of her campaign donors. Earlier this summer, she approved that $7 million contract and then announced that she was suspending parking collection during the COVID crisis. And this contract was supposed to be for a private company to come in and enforce the parking rules. And so then there was this, I think it was about 3-month-long hiatus from collecting parking fees. And so I think there's a bad taste that the Board of Aldermen has left in their mouths from that whole episode, because the Public Safety Committee certainly went after, they wanted to do subpoena powers and get documents, because they were all saying that they were just not getting responses, information from her about that contract and specifics with that contract. Now, of course, that committee is chaired by her arch nemesis, Jeffrey Boyd, which is worth noting. But that entire committee was pretty united in their complaints. So I think they just have a bad taste in their mouth, and they're not really sure if she might be, bluffing about the amount of employees that she has to lay off here or not.
I first of all think that when her decision to suspend parking meter enforcement was actually a very positive thing at the time. I thought so then. And, of course, we were still out and about before the pandemic, I think, weren't we? Or in the early days, and maybe not. But I thought it was a good decision. Wasn't that contract sort of reviewed by the state auditor, or is that a different part of the audit? I thought the auditor found that everything was handled properly. I may be mixed up on the auditor did look at. I thought that. I could be wrong, but I don't know enough about the details of the contract. But I don't have any criticism of her all for suspending parking collections, because that was to help people out.
Well, I mean, this is Jeffrey Boyd doing his best Donald Trump and just being a jerk. And this has more to do with not what's going on right now, but what's going to go on in early spring of next year and the mayoral race. I wonder how Jeffrey Boyd's tudes have changed since Lyda announced that she was not going to go and run for mayor again. And Lewis Reed is, I guess, started a committee that sounds like he's going to run. This is all jostling, and Jeffrey Boyd wants to, throw a stick in the spokes because he got beat by her. And it's just, it's petty, but politics right now is about as petty as it could get.
Well, there was a thing in the contract, wasn't there, that in the past, the contract, the company would be paid depending on how much they collected, and that was waived this time, so that we had to continue paying even though we weren't collecting anything. I mean, that did seem kind of, like a bad deal for this city.
Well, when it comes to people running city agencies and city departments, I think this is the first of many requests for lots of money. We're going to see a lot of this in the months and years to come.
Now, if the company donates $7 million and 1 penny to Shara Jones, then I might have some questions about that.
Hey, Alvin, your words are going to be the last one because we're out of time for this segment. However, on Donnybrook Next Up, we're going to talk to Dr. Daniel Hoft, who leads St. Louis University's Vaccine Center. That's next. It should be very interesting. Don't go away.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, welcome to Donnybrook Next Up, and we want to thank Dr. Daniel Hoft, who leads St. Louis University's Vaccine Center, for joining us. Doctor, welcome aboard. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, we've had some interesting announcements that we have 2 vaccines on the way to inoculate people against COVID-19, and turns out that they're both about 95% effective. As a man who studies this for a living, what's your reaction?
It's better than our best dream about these vaccines. We never thought they would be anywhere close to that effective on the first try, and 2 of them within a week reporting the same level of efficacy in preliminary analyses. The additional analyses are ongoing, but the people that are reporting these have given enough numbers for us to know that there's something very, very good happening with these vaccines. So I'm ecstatic. We still have a lot of challenges ahead. It's not like we have vaccines currently. So let's stop trying to protect ourselves with preventative measures, public health measures. We need to keep doing that because it's going to take at least a year before we can vaccinate the whole U.S. public. It'll be phased out in different segments to those at highest risk and those that are taking care of the people that are sick. But those vaccinations could start as early as before Christmas. I lose my breath, though. There are some delivery issues that are very major that have to happen to get this vaccine all over the United States. But it's very soon that the first vaccinations will be given outside of clinical trials, and that we will then be moving through a priority scheme phased in from starting with those at highest risks and then going to the whole public eventually.
Alvin?
Will the vaccine work on coyotes? Oh, that's from the first show. Never mind. I'm going to ask you the question I got asked the most over the past 7 days, okay? And it is, when developing the vaccine, okay, how are those who are producing it in the trial? What shows? How do they know that it works, that 95% level? And I had no idea when asked. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I thought, that's a good question. I don't know. So how does that work where you know or they know that this works?
Well, it's a long process that in most cases takes many years actually to get a vaccine from concept to something that can be used in the public. If you're asking specifically about how do we know in a phase 3 trial whether or not the vaccine is working, I can focus on that. But before that, there's a lot of work that happens first in animal models to make sure that there's no major toxicity problems that could be seen very early in the development of the vaccine. We also want to see in animal models whether or not these vaccines can protect the animals from the actual pathogen or infection that we're trying to protect against, SARS-CoV-2 in this case, the cause of COVID-19. And then the vaccines have to be made in a good manufacturing practice way, scaled up so that millions of doses can be available for use. After that, we enter with those good manufacturing practice or GMP versions of vaccines, clinical trials, starting with small groups in phase 1. What we're trying to do is first expose a small number of people to a new vaccine that's never been in people before, looking to see if there's any common toxicities in human. So you start small to minimize exposure and look for these very common events. Then you move up. That's usually, phase 1 is usually somewhere 40 to 80 people or something. Phase 2, you might go to hundreds, larger number. You can see some adverse events or side effects that are are more common that are not as common. And when you have more people, and you're slowly moving towards larger numbers of people to be careful and safe. And finally into phase 3, where in these trials for COVID-19, all of them are designed to at least enroll 30,000 people and up to 60,000 people to be followed for a 2-year period. So these trials are very there's a lot of thinking that goes into this.
Well, all right, but the people that are in trials, they don't have COVID, correct?
That's right.
Okay, well then how do you know if I don't have COVID and I have been in trials and I get the vaccination, how do you know that it is working on me? Is there something in the body, blood, something that you measure? How do you know that it's working or will work?
Yes, I need to get back to your original question instead of being an academic here. Yes, once we are in phase 3, then we are looking at how many people get infected just from their natural exposures. And in the phase 3 in particular, we have enrolled people that are at the highest risks. And we've been focusing on doing that, either one of two risks, the risk of being exposed and getting infected, and the risk of developing severe disease once infected, because those are the people that we really need to help the most. So those are the individuals we bring into the trials. And then we're following them after vaccination weekly to determine whether or not they've developed any symptoms that are consistent with COVID-19. If there's any hint of new infection in any of these volunteers, we bring them in and we test them with the PCR tests, the test that's right now the most sensitive one for looking at whether or not somebody is infected with SARS-CoV-2. So it's been focused on looking at symptomatic infection that is confirmed by the PCR test, that where you get the nose swab, and that is sent for this PCR. So in the trials that have reported these fantastic results, at this point, there's been enough infections to have what we call the statistical power to be able to say whether or not there's a difference between placebo, which half the people have gotten, versus the actual vaccine. And the first two reports of efficacy, they hit the ball right out of the park with almost all of the, or more than 90% of the infections occurring in the placebo group and not in those that got the vaccine. So that's how you tell, is by bringing people into these trials. You follow them after vaccination for prolonged periods of time. And then you look for these infections, and then you see how many of them were in the control group that got the placebo, that is not the vaccine and won't induce a protective response or any kind of response against COVID, and compare how many infections they got with how many infections the people that got the vaccine get.
Thank you.
Hey, Ray.
Doctor, this week, Governor Mike Parsons said he was concerned, didn't want to do a mask mandate because it might lead to a vaccine mandate. How does someone whose resume says vaccine expert on it process that, react to it?
Well, we all need to do our part in this pandemic. It's the worst pandemic that's happened in 100 years. We've never seen anything like this in our lifetimes. The only things we can do before we have widespread vaccination inducing protective response is minimize our exposures to getting infected and minimize the chances of, if we get infected, spreading the infection to other people. The most important thing we can do for that is follow the 4 major rules: wearing masks, washing your hands, not congregating in large groups, and trying to keep your hands away from your face when you don't have a mask on. But there should be nothing political about this. There should be no debate. We know that wearing a mask can both prevent somebody from having, not completely, but it can reduce the chances of somebody getting infected who's wearing the mask. And we also know that it can reduce the chances of somebody infected spreading it to somebody else. So yes, it's a personal choice, but it's a personal choice that affects not only yourself, but everyone around you, including all your loved ones and all of your family members, all your friends. And so I don't understand why there's a debate.
Thank you, Doctor. Bill?
Doctor, I'm told that these two vaccines are very dissimilar, that they're different theories led to each of them. So as a very thrilled consumer, can hardly wait for the vaccines, how does a person know which one to take? Or if I take both of them, assuming I could get them, do I then have 190%? I mean, what is the consumer supposed to do?
You can't get better than 100%.
Well, that shows you my knowledge of science. But
he's always trying to get ahead.
Great vaccines.
Yeah.
How does one know which to do?
And we don't know all the answers to that yet, of course, because we haven't finished all the trials. And we haven't finished any of the trials completely, to be transparent. As I think I said earlier, in the trials that have already reported this great news, both the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, those are very similar types of vaccines. They're using a new platform that is, instead of taking protein and injecting it into somebody, or making a virus that is no longer able to grow in people, but can infect a cell and then express the protein that you want to immunize with. In this case, you're using a messenger RNA molecule, which, if you go back to your biology, I could give you a 101 or a 1 minus 1. Or
remedial for me.
So our genes, are the chromosomes in the chromosomes, and those are the blueprints for everything that our body does. But they can't do it by themselves. What they have to do is translate the sequence of the genes into a messenger RNA molecule. And that messenger RNA molecule then moves out of the nucleus of a cell where the genes are, gets to places where there's factories for making proteins based upon the sequence of the messenger RNA. So we're taking a step backward in terms of biology to use the sequence guide for making the protein and taking that and injecting that directly. It's a novel type of vaccine technology. There are no licensed vaccines yet using this technology.
Now, which one would you take, though, Doctor?
Which one?
Yes, if Bill's got the choice between Moderna and Pfizer.
I'd take any vaccine that was shown to be this effective. I mean, we'll see. And some both that have been reported so far, greater than 90% or almost 95% at both of them. That's amazing.
So either are good. Christine, what do you have?
And so when you're trying to determine if a vaccine is effective, going back to that for just one quick second, it's not like you're exposing these people to the virus and seeing what happens, right? You're just letting them live the normal course of their lives. And if they get exposed and they start experiencing symptoms, that's when they come and you start your testing, right?
Yes. Well, they're living their normal life. They haven't been infected yet, but they are exposed through their normal life. We are making sure that we recommend to all the volunteers that get vaccinated that they continue all the practices of mass hand washing, social distance, and all that, because we don't want to increase their risk just for the trial. That would not be ethical. But since we have such large numbers coming in, not being infected in the first place, and we have a lot of transmission of the virus in our communities where these trials are being done, there's plenty of chance for that to just happen naturally.
I see. And so how do you address the anti-vaxxer community out there who is always skeptical of vaccines that have been around for years?
Mm-hmm. So it's always important to think about safety first with vaccines, and that's what all of us in this field do. We would never want to give a vaccine that was known to not be safe to people. And a lot of work goes into that. And that's been true for 50, 70 years. So I understand how people have hesitancy. There are different reasons for that. Some don't trust the people that develop the vaccines because there is business involved. And there could be other motivations for making these vaccines. Others have been inappropriately experimented on in the past and suffered from those terrible things that are certainly were allowed in the 60s and earlier, but there's much tighter regulation on human research these days. And I sit on the National Vaccine Advisory Committee. And what we are charged with doing is to Admiral Gerard, the deputy director for HHS, on what are the gaps, what are the needs for vaccine development, and how do we get vaccines to be utilized more widely by everybody that needs them. And there's a lot of work going into this now, trying to think about how do we convince people that are reticent to take vaccines and have been for a long time. How do we get them to take this vaccine that is, we believe, and everyone working in these areas, as well as many other people, believe are the most important thing we can do to quell this pandemic.
Sure, but doctor, what if somebody has already contracted COVID-19? Like, just using one example, Governor Mike Parson. Does he now need to get the vaccine?
We don't know at this point. If he was in the highest risk groups based upon age and comorbidities and demographic groups and things like that, we'd still be pushing it for sure. Those recommendations will be informed over the next year. We don't really know the answers yet. We don't know how long the vaccines will induce this protective response. We're hopeful that it will be for years, but we don't know that. That's why these trials have been designed to not just get the data you need to get an emergency use authorization approval or licensure, but to go beyond that and follow people for 2 years. One is to look at the how long the immune responses last, and the other is to look at safety over a prolonged period of time. We have maximized our ability to see all the safety events in a short period of time by enrolling such large numbers of volunteers. But we can't just speed up time. So we do also want to look to make sure that there's no delayed safety problems with any of these vaccines.
Sure. Alvin?
I have little money and I don't have healthcare insurance. Is the vaccine going to find me, or do I have to go find the vaccine? And in short, is it going to be free?
Yes, that is the plan. That's been the very consistent message across the political spectrum and from everyone, that these vaccines have been developed with $10 billion of taxpayers' money, the warp speed dollars that have gone into supporting the CoVPN, the coronavirus prevention network that we're part of with many other sites here in the U.S. Sorry, I got off track.
No, they're free. They're free. That's good. Hey, Ray, you've got a question for Dr.
To follow up on my previous question, how close to a mandate would we ever get for the vaccine? So if correct me if I'm wrong, in our country, we don't really mandate vaccines, but for kids, for example, we sort of enforce them by saying, if you want to go to public school, for example, you have to have a vaccine, but we don't mandate them. And my understanding is the pediatricians want to respect the view of parents who don't want a vaccine, except, interestingly, in an epidemic. And there's an exception built in there. And so my question, I guess, is how close, being that this is the general public, would you favor a vaccine mandate? And if not, how close can we get it? Because if enough people don't do it, it doesn't do any good, right?
Yeah. I don't favor a vaccine mandate because that could do more damage potentially than it's worth. At this point, we think we don't need every single person in the U.S. vaccinated. We need as many as we can get to achieve what people have been talking about, in terms of herd immunity. And what we understand from other outbreaks and other situations where we've had time to look at this, that typically, if you have at least 60% or 70% of your population immune, that could be from previous infection, if it induced an immune response that was protective against a repeat challenge or exposure. We don't know about that yet. It could also be due to vaccination. And we can speed up the getting to the 60 to 70% herd immunity by vaccinating people and prevent a lot of deaths in the process, which would occur if you were waiting for natural infection to infect enough people to have that level of population level immunity. Once you get up that high, it's just that you have so many people that even if they're exposed, they won't get sick, and hopefully they won't transmit it. But we don't know that yet. That's something important about the vaccines, is that we know they look really fantastic in terms of preventing a symptomatic case of infection, both of the RNA vaccines. But we don't know whether or not people have the immune response from the vaccine, whether or not they will have less virus when they get infected, are asymptomatic, don't get real sick, but could they still spread it to somebody else? And that's an important thing that we need to figure out. And that would further amplify the indirect effects of herd immunity by inducing protection against the infection itself in an individual, but also preventing the risk of that person who's not going to get sick from spreading it to somebody else before they clear it.
Okay, Bill?
Yeah, I'm a little confused, Doctor. I mean, for the masks, we depend on almost full compliance. But with the vaccine, if I get vaccinated, like Christine was talking about, all the anti-vaxxers, Ray was say the 50% of the people say, I'm not going to take one, but I take one. Can't I walk into a bar where some of those people are, or a restaurant, and not worry because I've got the vaccine?
Well, there's reasons not to do that. The one I just mentioned was that if you had the vaccine and you're protected against a symptomatic infection and severe disease, but not protected against having some virus grow in your nose and be spewed out when you cough or sneeze or even talk loud or sing, you could infect somebody else. So that's why we need to know if the vaccines can protect not only the individual, but prevent the spread from that individual. It's not like a vaccine is going to induce 100% complete immunity, meaning that not a single viral particle from the infection can get inside a cell in your nose and start replicating. What the vaccines in most cases do is they prevent it once it's in and prevents it from spreading around.
Okay, Doctor, we have less than a minute to go, and Christine has a quick, important question. Christine?
Okay.
I was just wondering if any of your clinical trials have involved pregnant women, or if there is some knowledge yet at all on how the vaccine is affecting or can affect pregnant women.
So none of the COVID trials so far have recruited pregnant females or children less than 12. Most of the COVID trials haven't enrolled any children, but one of them has.
Just quickly, would it be safe, do you think, for pregnant women?
We don't know. What we're gearing up to do is to do trials specifically in pregnant females and kids.
Very well. Dr. Daniel Hoft, I'm sorry, the unforgiving clock says that we have to say thank you and goodbye. We sure appreciate you joining us, and thanks for all your great work at SLU's Vaccine Center.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.